I invite you to listen to my new dramatic story about military honor, betrayal, and just retribution on the Purple Heart Stories channel. I'm sure it won't disappoint you. And please support with a like and subscription if you enjoy it. Chapter I: Beneath the Surface. My name is Mike Rivers, former Special Forces operator, 38 years old. 5 years ago, I hung my combat gear on a nail and took up restoration brushes, just as my late mother had wished. Lauren, my wife, 34 years old, works in the art world, or so she always told me. I thought I knew her. I was wrong. Beneath the surface of our family idol lurked a nightmare that began with 6 ordinary paintings purchased at a flea market. Now I know. Sometimes the most terrifying truth hides beneath a thin layer of paint, and once you discover it, there's no going back. New life with old ghosts. I carefully applied solution to a small section of an 18th century still life. My movements were precise, methodical, the same ones I once used to disassemble and reassemble my M4 with closed eyes. Discipline is discipline everywhere, whether you're holding a weapon or a restoration brush. The canvas before me depicted a vase with fruit against a dark background. In places, the paint had cracked, forming a web of time. I saw in these cracks a map, a topography of history that could be read if you knew the language. After 5 years as a restorer, I had learned to understand this language. Suddenly, a sharp sound rang out in the workshop. A metal can fell, and I instantly ducked behind the table, my hand instinctively reaching for my thigh where a holster once hung. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer. Adrenaline flooded my bloodstream. Syria 2016. A dusty street in Raqqa. Enemy sniper eliminated, but suddenly, the sound of a falling stone behind me. No, stop, I'm in my workshop in Boston, 2025. No snipers, no ambushes. Breathe, Mike, count 10, 9, 8. My voice sounded hoarse in the empty room. I slowly rose and approached the fallen can of solvent. It had been knocked over by a draft from the partially open window, a banal explanation for a disproportionate reaction. Dr. Levitsky, my therapist, called this a trigger flash. 2 sessions a week for 3 years, and I still flinch at sudden noises. My eyes fell on the clock, 6:45 p.m. Lauren was supposed to return from a charity event by 7. My wife is a business consultant for art galleries. At least, that's what's written in our tax returns. At 7:10 p.m., I heard the sound of a key in the lock. Lauren entered, exuding expensive perfume. Her platinum hair was styled in an elegant bob. Her emerald eyes seemed brighter than usual. Sorry I'm late. The charity auction ran long. Rich donors are in no hurry to part with their money. She kissed me on the cheek. Her lips were cold as porcelain. How much did you raise? I observed her face. Micro-expressions can tell more than words. Enough for a new exhibition in the Children's Museum's East Wing. Lauren set her purse on the hallway table, too carefully, without her usual casualness. What's for dinner? I'm not hungry, I said, noting how the muscles around her mouth tensed. But I can heat up some lasagna for you. Don't bother. There were hors d'oeuvres at the reception. She walked into the living room without removing her shoes. Another peculiarity, Lauren always took off her shoes at the door. I returned to my work, but with one ear I could hear her speaking quietly on the phone in the bedroom. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was cold, businesslike. Not the tone usually used to discuss charity events. 5 years ago, when I hung up my body armor and decided to retrain as a restorer, Lauren seemed like a real salvation. She appeared in my life when the nightmares were particularly vivid and offered a new future. I clung to her like a drowning man to a life preserver. But in recent months, something had changed. The micro cracks in our marriage were becoming more noticeable, like on the old paintings I restored. And as an experienced restorer, I couldn't help but see them. The next morning I woke up at 5:00 a.m. as usual. Lauren slept stretched out like a string. Even in sleep, she maintained her posture. I put on my running shoes and went out for a jog. Saturday, flea market day. My mother, when she was alive, used to take me there every Saturday. Art can be found in the most unexpected places, Mikey, she would say, sorting through old frames and faded watercolors. She was the first to notice my talent for drawing and enrolled me in art school, from which I soon ran away, in search of greater adrenaline. When I returned from my third combat deployment for her funeral, I found in her belongings a framed childhood drawing of mine, a portrait of my mother, unskilled, but with accurately captured expression in the eyes. On the back, in her handwriting, "My son sees the soul of things." That day, I made a promise to fulfill her dream. Perhaps too late, but I became what she wanted me to be, someone who restores beauty to the damaged. The flea market on Saturday morning buzzed like a beehive. I moved methodically between the rows, scanning the goods with a professional eye, a useful habit from my past life, noticing details that stand out from the general picture. "Hey, military man," a hoarse voice called out to me. I turned and saw an old man with disheveled gray beard. He stood behind a rickety table covered with various junk. "Yes, you. I recognized that look from a mile away. Served in Vietnam myself." I approached. The old man extended a wrinkled hand. "Harry Finch, collector of odds and ends and a bit of a pack rat." "Mike Rivers," I replied, shaking his dry palm. "What did you mean by that look?" "One who's seen hell always carries its reflection in his eyes," Harry remarked philosophically. "But now you're into art. I see paint under your fingernails." "Restorer," I nodded, "learning to restore what others have created." "Then I've got something for you." The old man leaned down and pulled out a cardboard box from under the table. 6 canvases by an unknown artist. Bought them at an estate sale in the suburbs. Nothing special but perfect for practice. And the price is good. I carefully extracted one of the paintings, a mediocre landscape, executed by a confident but not particularly skillful hand. The other 5 were from the same series, nature scenes, city streets, nothing remarkable. "How much?" I asked. "For you, military man, 100 for all. Consider it gratitude for your service." "But they're worth more," I objected, a habit of fair play. Harry waved his hand. "I need the space, and you need the practice. Take them." I returned home with the box under my arm. A note on the kitchen table informed me that Lauren had gone away for the weekend with friends. Unexpected, but not for the first time. I took the paintings to my workshop and began a methodical examination. Something wasn't right about them. Intuition, honed by years when the price of a mistake was a life, rarely fails. I carefully examined the edges of the canvas, the mounting, the frame. Technical details revealed oddities. The canvases seemed older than they actually were. Someone had artificially aged them using professional techniques. Why make new paintings look old? Only if you're hiding something beneath the top layer. Discovery of the hidden layer. I arranged all 6 paintings on a long work table and turned on special lamps that mimicked natural lighting. Under their light, the colors seemed more vibrant, and the texture of the canvas appeared more distinct. I put on the magnifying glasses I used for detailed work and began a thorough examination. The first sign of forgery revealed itself almost immediately. The age of the cracklewood didn't correspond to the supposed time of creation. The cracks had been artificially created using a special compound that I easily recognized. Basic tricks for imitating antiquity. On the third painting, depicting a rural landscape, I noticed an area with anomalous texture. In the lower right corner, the paint strokes didn't match the rest of the technique, as if the artist had tried to conceal something under an additional layer. I carefully dropped a few drops of professional solvent from a small pipette onto the edge of this area. The reaction came immediately. The top layer of paint began to dissolve, revealing different colors underneath. There it is, I muttered, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that accompanied reconnaissance operations in the past. I spent the next 3 hours in absolute concentration, methodically removing the top layer from a small section of the painting. The work required jeweler's precision. Too aggressive an approach could damage the layer underneath. Each movement was measured, each stroke calculated. When an area the size of a postage stamp was cleaned, I froze, not believing my eyes. Beneath the banal landscape, details of another image emerged, a female body in an unambiguous pose. And although the cleared fragment was tiny, I unmistakably recognized the features. My heart beat faster. I stepped back, removed my magnifying glasses, and rubbed my eyes. Impossible. But when I looked again at the cleared section, there was no doubt. Those body curves, that mole on the thigh, Lauren, my wife. With a sudden feverish impatience that seized me, I returned to work, expanding the cleared area. I used a stronger solvent, risking damage to the lower layer. I needed to see more, to make sure it wasn't my imagination playing tricks. By midnight, the first painting was half cleared, and I had no doubts left. It depicted Lauren nude, in a pose that might be called erotic if not for the strange atmosphere of cold staging. The expression on her face combined the professional detachment of a model with something else. Predatory, calculating. I began working on the second painting. The process went faster. Now I knew exactly what I was looking for and which technique to apply. By 2 in the morning, half of the second painting revealed an even more explicit scene, Lauren in the company of an elegant silver-haired man. His face was turned in profile, but even so, one could feel the authority and cold superiority. Work on the third painting took less than an hour. I was already operating like an automaton with the efficiency of a combat operation. A new scene, a new pose, the same man. But now there was a third figure, a young woman, almost a girl, with frightened eyes. By dawn, I had processed all 6 paintings. The further I went, the more disturbing the scenes became. The last one depicted something like a merchandise evaluation. Lauren and the silver-haired man examining naked girls lined up as if at an auction. In the corner of the room, observers were visible. Their faces remained in shadow, but greedy interest was evident in their postures. I sat surrounded by these paintings, feeling physically nauseated. My wife, the woman with whom I shared a bed, her life turned out to be a complete stranger. The sound of a key turning in the lock made me jump. Lauren had returned earlier than planned. I hid the paintings under a canvas cloth, wiped the chemicals from my hands, and took a deep breath, preparing to play the role of an unsuspecting husband. Beginning of a secret investigation. I didn't sleep all night. Lauren breathed evenly in the bedroom, while I sat in the kitchen, analyzing the images as if they were intelligence data before an operation. I methodically laid out the photographs I had taken of all 6 clean paintings and began noting details. Interiors rich, tastefully furnished. Judging by the style, European influence. On one of the walls was a painting I recognized, a work by the French artist Boucher, currently in a private collection in Munich. Lauren's jewelry, different in each painting, all expensive. Some I had never seen, though I thought I knew my wife's wardrobe down to the last earring. The silver-haired man, about 50, a distinctive scar on his left wrist, a signet ring on the little finger of his right hand. His posture revealed military bearing or aristocratic upbringing. The model girls, various ages from very young to mid-20s, different ethnic types but predominantly Eastern European appearances. One detail repeated in the eyes of most, there was fear or detachment, not the expression professional models typically have. Around 7 in the morning, I heard Lauren getting up. I quickly gathered all the materials and hid them in a special waterproof case that I used for storing valuable documents. I placed the case under a floorboard in my workshop, an old hiding place set up in the first months after returning from service, when paranoia was my constant companion. By the time Lauren entered the kitchen, I was already making coffee, like on any ordinary Sunday morning. "You're up early," she noticed, taking a cup from my hands. "Couldn't sleep." "Worked late," I shrugged. "How are your friends?" "Oh, you know Carol," she waved her hand dismissively. "Spent all night discussing her new boyfriend. Deadly boring." I nodded, watching her drink coffee. Her nails, perfect manicure, not a trace that she had spent the weekend at a country house as she claimed. No dirt under her nails, not the slightest sign of being unkempt. Too perfect. "I have a spa appointment today," said Lauren, finishing her coffee. "I'll be back in the evening." "All right," I kissed her on the cheek, nodding the aroma of perfume, not the one she usually used at home. "I'll be in the workshop." As soon as the door closed behind her, I waited 15 minutes, watching the clock. Then I put on latex gloves from my restoration kit. Each movement was deliberate, each step thought out. I started with the wardrobe, methodically checked every drawer, every shelf. Nothing suspicious until I reached the back corner of the wardrobe, where I discovered an almost imperceptible panel. Carpentry skills acquired while setting up my workshop suggested. The construction was non-standard. After several minutes of investigation, the panel yielded, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside lay 3 phones, stacks of cash in different currencies, and an ID in the name of Elizabeth Price with Lauren's photograph, but with altered hair and makeup. I photographed the contents of the hiding place, then carefully extracted the phones. 2 turned out to be primitive burners, disposable devices typically used for anonymous contacts. The third was a smartphone with biometric protection. Using a SIM card cloning device that I had kept from my service days, I created copies of the data from the simple phones. Then I tried to access the smartphone, unsuccessfully. The biometric lock required Lauren's fingerprint. I carefully returned everything to its places, restored the original position of each item, and closed the hiding place. Lauren was observant. The slightest change could alert her. Next was her laptop, password protected, but after several attempts I cracked the combination. Lauren used the date of our meeting, but with some symbols replaced by special characters. Sentimental, or just easy to remember. The laptop contained encrypted folders. Most were protected more securely than the military servers I had access to during my service. However, the browser cache revealed traces, frequent visits to a site called Studio Elysium with an unusual authorization system. I copied everything I could onto an encrypted flash drive, then methodically returned the laptop to its original state. Closed the same programs that had been open, returned the cursor to the same position, even wiped the keyboard to remove traces of use. The final step was examining her car, parked in the garage. Under the front seat, I found another phone, an ordinary-looking smartphone, but with an unusually high level of protection. In the glove compartment, fake driver's license in the name of Carol Myers, and a parking ticket from an underground parking lot in an area Lauren had never mentioned. I photographed the findings, returned everything to its places, and left the garage through the back door. The first rule of reconnaissance: don't let the target suspect they're being watched. Lauren's double life. The next morning I began surveillance. This was familiar territory. In special forces, I had received specialized training in urban observation. Usually the targets were terrorists, not my own wife. Lauren left the house at 9:30, impeccably dressed in a business suit, not the image she usually employed for meetings with gallery clients. I followed at a safe distance, observing basic surveillance principles, never getting too close, periodically changing position, avoiding direct gaze. Her route led through an upscale district to a modern glass and concrete building. On the facade, an elegant sign, Studio Elysium, exclusive photography and painting, the same name I had seen in her browser. I settled in a cafe across the street, ordered coffee, and took out a tablet on which I pretended to work. In reality, using a directional microphone and a lip-reading application, I was trying to gather information about the studio's visitors. After 3 hours of observation, a pattern emerged. Young women entered with accompaniment but left either with different companions or didn't leave at all. Men in expensive suits entered briefly, often with briefcases, and left the building with satisfied expressions. A classic trading point scheme, only the merchandise here was of a special kind. Around 2 o'clock, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the building. Two sturdy men with professional posture, clearly former military or security service employees, got out and took positions at the entrance. High-level security. At 6:45 p.m., Lauren finally left the building. She looked different, her hair styled in a more severe fashion, her walk changed, becoming harder and more confident. Even her posture was different, not the graceful elegance I was accustomed to, but cold authority, as if she had dropped one mask and put on another. She walked 2 blocks and stopped at a bus stop where a young woman with clearly provincial appearance nervously shifted from foot to foot. Cheap clothes, uncertain posture, wide-open eyes absorbing the city views. "You must be Megan," I heard Lauren's voice through the directional microphone. Her timbre had changed, became warmer with caring notes. "I'm Elizabeth from the agency. We spoke on the phone about the casting." The girl nodded energetically, obviously delighted. "Yes, yes. Thank you for meeting me. I was so worried about getting lost in the big city." "No need to worry, dear." Lauren Elizabeth gently took her by the arm. "Our studio specializes in working with aspiring models from small towns. You have that fresh face our clients are looking for." They moved in the direction of Studio Elysium. I followed at a distance, taking pictures of their interaction through a miniature lens disguised as a button on my jacket. "What kind of photo session will it be?" asked the girl with slight concern. "An exclusive art project for a European publication," Lauren answered confidently. "Nothing vulgar, pure art, and the fee is appropriate, 5,000 for a day's work." The girl's eyes widened. 5,000, are you serious?" "Absolutely. Our clients value real beauty and are willing to pay for it." Lauren smiled so warmly and sincerely that I almost believed her myself. They approached the studio building, where they were met by the same guards. I took final photos, including the license plates of all parked cars, and retreated. For today, the information was sufficient. Sitting in a quiet bar 3 blocks from home that evening, I reviewed the collected materials. Lauren was not just a model for vile paintings, she actively recruited other girls. Evidently, Studio Elysium was a cover for something much more sinister. I remembered the last of the clean paintings, the one where girls were lined up for evaluation. This wasn't artistic fantasy. It was documentation of a trafficking process. Descent into the abyss. Over the next week, I led a double life. By day, a loving husband busy with restoration in his workshop. By night, an investigator documenting every step of his wife. I installed miniature cameras in the house, well hidden enough that Lauren wouldn't discover them. Microphones were embedded in ordinary household items, a desk lamp, kitchen clock, frame with our wedding photo. Bitter irony. On the third day of observation, I noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Lauren stayed at the studio until late evening. The building's floors were lit differently during these hours. Not the even light of office lamps, but subdued, directional lighting characteristic of photo studios. I decided to deepen the digital investigation. The corporate website of Studio Elysium represented a typical showcase of a fashionable photo studio: minimalist design, work samples, list of services. Nothing suspicious on the surface. However, using penetration testing tools left over from special training, I discovered a poorly protected administrative panel. 3 hours of work with code, and I gained access to a closed section of the site, protected from casual eyes. What was revealed confirmed the worst suspicions. The model catalog contained hundreds of profiles of young women with photographs, detailed physical parameters, and a strange coding system of suitability categories. Each profile had a status: in processing, ready for transportation, delivered, written off. I began cross-checking faces from the catalog with missing persons databases available in open sources. The results were staggering. More than 60% of the models were listed as missing in various states. For most of them, active searches had long been discontinued. On Thursday, I decided to risk it and move to the active phase of surveillance. While Lauren spent the evening at the studio, I infiltrated the building of a neighboring restaurant, closed for renovation, and installed a directional microphone on the roof. The technology allowed me to pick up conversations through glass windows at distances up to 100 meters. Most of the intercepted conversations were standard office chatter, but around 9 in the evening, I caught a conversation that made my blood run cold. "This merchandise is of exceptional quality, Frederick," Lauren's voice sounded businesslike. "Fresh batch from Eastern Europe, all documents in order, impeccable legends." "My client from the Middle East won't be pleased with the delay," replied a male voice with a slight European accent. "He specifically ordered blue-eyed blondes for his collection. Transportation through regular channels is risky now. After the incident in Chicago, the feds have stepped up checks. We're using the sea route. In 3 days, the batch will be in Dubai. Make sure the merchandise arrives in perfect condition. The last delivery contained damaged specimens, bruises, signs of resistance. This is unacceptable for clients of this level. I personally control the pre-transport preparation," Steele slipped into Lauren's voice. "No damage, complete obedience. They will be like porcelain dolls." I recorded the conversation, then photographed the man as he left the building: silver hair, expensive suit, military bearing. It was he who had been in the paintings with Lauren. Returning home, I launched a facial recognition program, comparing the photograph with open databases. After an hour, I got a result: Frederick Duvier, a well-known auctioneer specializing in contemporary art. Belgian citizen, educated at the Sorbonne, residences in 5 countries. Impeccable reputation in the art world, numerous charitable projects. Perfect cover for someone who trades in human beings. Corrupted system. The next day, I tracked a van with a cleaning company logo that regularly departed from the back doors of the studio. The route led through the suburbs to a private airfield, fenced with a high fence topped with barbed wire. I parked on a hill overlooking the runway and, through night vision binoculars, watched as young women were led out of the van. They moved mechanically, as if in a trance, probably under the influence of sedatives. They were loaded onto a small private plane without identification markings. I recorded the registration number and later traced it through an acquaintance from air traffic control who owed me a favor. Over the past month, the plane had made regular flights to Dubai, Munich, and Singapore. The picture-taking shape was disgusting. Studio Elysium was merely a facade for an international human trafficking network. Young women were lured with promises of modeling careers, then sold to wealthy clients around the world. I understood that action needed to be taken through official channels. Whatever skills I possessed, it was impossible to destroy an international criminal network alone. I needed help from the feds. I spent 2 nights forming an anonymous package of evidence for the FBI. I included photographs, conversation recordings, transport route coordinates, screenshots from the catalog, all carefully documented and structured. No mentions of Lauren or my connection to the case. I wanted the investigation to be objective. I planned to deliver the information directly to the Human Trafficking Division, headed by Agent Harris. His reputation as a fighter against slave trade was impeccable. At least, that's what the newspapers wrote. Before sending, I decided to review once more all the paintings that had launched this investigation. On the last one, depicting a group merchandise evaluation, I noticed a detail I had missed earlier. In the corner of the luxuriously furnished room was a large mirror in a carved frame. It reflected not only the models and the auctioneer, but also the observers standing in the shadows. One of them partially turned toward the light, enough for the artist to capture his profile. I took an enlarged photograph of this fragment and processed it using an image enhancement program. The face in the mirror became clearer. Like a gut punch, I recognized this person. Agent George Harris, head of the regional FBI division for combating human trafficking, the very one to whom I was planning to send the evidence. A year ago, we had crossed paths at a public event, a charity evening in support of victims of violence. Lauren had insisted we attend. Now I understood why. The system was corrupted to the very top. Turning to official bodies meant not only the failure of the investigation, but also a direct threat to me. They would find out who I was and begin covering their tracks. I set aside the prepared package of documents and realized I would have to act alone. I remembered the words of an instructor from Special Forces. If the system doesn't allow you to act within it, act outside the system. War had begun, and my first step should not be attack but the staging of a retreat. Let them believe the trail is lost, that the danger has passed. Meanwhile, I'll get closer. I looked at the paintings laid out on the table. 6 unremarkable landscapes beneath which a nightmare was hidden. It was time to lose them, to lull the enemy's vigilance. And when they relax, thinking the evidence has disappeared, I will strike. War never changes, I thought, returning to planning. Only the battlefields change. Chapter II, Owen the Trail. The first rule of war: to defeat the enemy, make him think you're retreating. Lauren and her accomplices must believe their secret is still safely hidden. Let them think I'm blind while I tighten the noose. I need to act quickly, methodically, without emotions. Just like in Kandahar when our team of 6 tracked a terrorist cell. Only now my team is just me, and the enemy lives right in my house. False robbery. Planning the operation took 36 hours. I developed a scheme for robbing my workshop with the same meticulousness with which I once prepared combat missions. Every detail had to look authentic, for Lauren, for the police, for observers from Studio Elysium. The security system of my workshop was my own creation, 6 motion sensors connected to a central console. The alarm signal was automatically sent to my phone and the local police station. Average patrol response time, 8.5 minutes. I chose the perfect time. Tuesday, 2:15 a.m. According to the statistics of night incidents, during this interval, the nearest patrol is usually busy in the shopping district in the northern part of the city. At 1:30, I carefully extracted all 6 paintings from the hiding place under the floorboard and transferred them to a rented storage unit 3 blocks away. Then I returned via back routes, constantly checking for surveillance. At 2:10, I put on latex gloves and began creating the crime scene. I overturned a shelf with tools, loudly but not chaotically, broke a window from the inside so that the glass fragments would fall correctly on the floor, broke into my own safe. I knew how to make it look authentic, without excessive damage. At 2:17, I disabled the cameras for 30 seconds, a technical glitch that happens once every few months. During this interval, I quickly changed into dark clothing and left the workshop through the back door, the one not visible from the street. At 2:18, I activated the alarm using remote access. The siren howled in the night silence. By the time the police arrived, exactly 9 minutes later, I had already returned home, showered, and gotten into bed. The phone rang, as expected. A sleepy, alarmed voice, a perfect imitation of someone awakened in the middle of the night. "Mr. Rivers, this is Officer Patterson from the precinct. The alarm went off in your workshop." "What? But I just left there 3 hours ago. Everything was fine." "You need to come, sir. Looks like a robbery." I woke Lauren, told her about the call. Her reaction was flawless: concern, worry, and offer to come along. But I noticed the micro-movement of her pupils, a slight contraction when I mentioned the workshop. Adrenaline, not fear. "Better stay home," I said. "It might be some kind of mistake. I don't want you driving across town in the middle of the night for nothing." "Are you sure?" A professional dose of concern in her voice. "Absolutely. I'll call if it's something serious." While getting dressed, I noticed from the corner of my eye how she took a phone, not the one she usually used at home. She typed a message, quickly deleted it from the history. The first alarm signal had been sent. At the workshop, I was met by 2 patrol officers and a detective, standard procedure for reported break-ins. I played shocked, examining the ransacked premises that I myself had prepared. "Can you determine what exactly is missing?" asked Detective Morgan, a stocky African-American with tired eyes. I slowly scanned the workshop, then froze at the empty wall where the 6 paintings had previously hung. "God, the Finch collection. 6 paintings I was restoring." Genuine regret sounded in my voice. "They're gone." "Are they valuable?" "Not particularly. Works by an unknown artist. I bought them at a flea market for practice, but I put a month's work into restoring them." I shook my head. "Strange that they took just those and not the antique tools. Those are worth several times more." The detective made a note in his notebook. "Sometimes thieves don't understand the value of what they're stealing. Maybe they thought that if they were paintings, they must be expensive." An hour later, the formalities were completed. I signed a statement, listing only the 6 paintings as missing items. The detective promised to keep me informed, but we both knew such minor thefts are rarely solved. Returning home, I found Lauren in the kitchen. She was making coffee at 4 in the morning, unusual for someone who typically sleeps until 8. "What happened?" she asked, handing me a cup. "They stole those paintings from the flea market. Remember, I told you about them. Not the biggest loss." She nodded with a perfectly calculated degree of sympathy. "I'm sorry your work is gone, but it wasn't a client's order, right? Just your hobby." "Yes, nothing important." I shrugged and noticed how she almost imperceptibly relaxed. When we returned to bed, I pretended to fall asleep. In reality, through half-closed eyelids, I watched as Lauren quietly got up and left the bedroom with her phone in hand. Through the speaker hidden in a decorative vase in the hallway, I heard her whisper, "Yes, those are definitely the paintings. I'm sure he doesn't suspect anything. Just a coincidence. No, I'll check again, but he knows nothing about the studio. Yes, tomorrow as usual." The trap had sprung. Now they would think the evidence had disappeared, and I was a blind husband who couldn't see beyond his nose. Perfect cover for what would follow next. Expanding the investigation. The next day, I began setting up an operations center in the rented storage unit. The place was perfect, a former art supplies warehouse in an industrial area, with concrete walls that muffled sound and minimal windows. The owner, an elderly Filipino man, took cash payments and asked no questions. First, I secured the perimeter, installed motion sensors disguised as lighting fixtures, and an autonomous video surveillance system, with encrypted data transmission to my phone. Then I organized the materials. The north wall became an analytical board. I hung city maps with Lauren's movement routes marked, photographs of key figures, Frederick Dovier, Agent Harris, guards, and diagrams of Studio Elysium and its branches. The east wall was dedicated to the paintings, all 6 canvases, now completely cleaned of the top layer, revealing their true content. I systematized information from each painting, noting details that might indicate locations, participants, dates. The center of the room housed a large table with computer equipment, 3 monitors connected to a secure server. I used routing methods I learned during military service to make digital traces untraceable. Over the next 3 days, I conducted continuous surveillance of the courier's movements, as I began calling the people who transported girls between the organization's facilities. Each time, they used different vehicles, from inconspicuous sedans to vans with logos of non-existent companies. I created a database of their routes, identifying patterns. They never used the same path twice, but always adhered to certain principles, avoiding streets with surveillance cameras, preferring industrial zones, moving during hours of least traffic. This wasn't just a criminal group, it was a militarized structure with a clear hierarchy and security protocols. Professionals. On the 4th day, I decided to take a risk. While Lauren was sound asleep, I had added a mild sleeping pill to her evening tea. I used her finger to unlock her smartphone. The database turned out to be truly horrifying. Lauren kept detailed records of every girl who passed through their network. The information was structured by categories. Class A, elite models for high-ranking clients, selling price from $300,000. Class B, standard exhibits for private collections. Price, $150,000 to $500,000. Class C, mass merchandise for establishments in third-world countries. Price, $50,000 $100,000. Each entry contained photographs, physical parameters, distinguishing features, psychological profile, and degree of trainability, intimate preferences. Some entries contained the notation "use for final performance," a euphemism whose meaning I preferred not to speculate on while it remained undeciphered for me. I copied all the information, carefully erased traces of my presence in the system, and returned the phone to its place. Lauren didn't stir. Decoding the data took another 2 days. I identified a complex network of merchandise movement through shell companies. Elysium Transport, a courier service that transported girls between facilities within the country. Nouvelle Vie Consulting, a company providing fake documents and legends for export abroad. Heritage Arts Foundation, a non-profit organization that served as a cover for money transfers. They all appeared to be legitimate businesses with impeccable reputations. Many sponsored charitable events, an irony that made me physically ill. But the most shocking discovery was the client list. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities, people whose faces smiled from magazine covers and television screens. Those who publicly fought against human trafficking were, in private, its main consumers. The system was so comprehensive, so deeply embedded in power structures, that destroying it through standard methods seemed impossible. I understood why Lauren and Frederick acted so confidently. They were protected by the system itself. But every system has a vulnerability, and I intended to find it. The dark side of art. While tracking the courier's movements, I noticed that once every 2 weeks, the vehicles headed toward an isolated mansion 30 miles from the city. The building was situated on a hill, surrounded by dense forest, with a single access road. A perfect place for something you want to hide from prying eyes. I rented an SUV with tinted windows and conducted initial reconnaissance. The mansion looked like a luxurious country estate, but the security system was more serious than many military facilities. Thermal imaging cameras, motion sensors, armed guards patrolling the perimeter every 30 minutes, biometric locks on all entrances. Direct infiltration would be suicide, but I didn't need to get inside, yet. It was enough to understand what was happening there. I found an ideal observation position on a neighboring hill, an abandoned hunting cabin with direct visibility of the mansion. Using a parabolic microphone and thermal vision binoculars, I could see and hear enough to form a picture. 3 nights of continuous observation, and I began to understand the rhythm of this place. On Fridays, closer to midnight, active movement began. Expensive cars with tinted windows arrived one after another. Guests entered through the back entrance, never mentioning names when meeting with security. A conditional knock, 3 short, 2 long, served as a password. On the 3rd night of observation, I witnessed an event. The parabolic microphone picked up fragments of what was happening inside, sounds that made my hair stand on end. Classical music, interspersed with cries of pain, applause, the sound of an auction hammer, music again, more screams. This wasn't just a place for selling human merchandise. It was a theater of horrors, where pain and humiliation were transformed into a performance for perverted minds. Young and beautiful girls, far from their homes, found themselves in a waking nightmare. When dawn broke, I returned to the city and began searching for information about the mansion's owner. There was no direct indication anywhere. The estate belonged to a company called Artie's Mortem LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands. It took 2 days of hacking work to trace the chain of proxies and identify the true beneficiary. It turned out to be Victor Ramirez, a state Supreme Court judge known for his harsh sentences against sexual offenders, an uncompromising fighter for morality, a classic example of a wolf in sheep's clothing. I continued my observation, this time focusing on technical details. I managed to hack one of the surveillance cameras located in the inner courtyard. It provided limited visibility, but enough to see part of what was happening inside through the panoramic windows of the main hall. What I saw was stylized as an avant-garde performance. On a platform stood a young woman, almost naked, with a bizarre metal construction attached to her body. A masked man slowly tightened the screws of this construction, causing the girl to flinch with pain. All this happened to the accompaniment of a piano played by another woman, with a detached, almost dead expression on her face. Around this scene sat spectators in evening attire and masks. They sipped champagne and politely applauded each new turn of the screw. In the corner stood operators with professional cameras, recording the performance from different angles. I turned off the monitor, unable to watch any longer. For the first time in my entire career in Special Forces, I was physically nauseated by what I saw. I had fought in places where human life was worth nothing, but even there some basic understanding of humanity remained. Here, I witnessed absolute evil, cold, calculating, clothed in the form of art. And Lauren was part of it, my wife, the woman I had lived with for 5 years. I took a swig of whiskey straight from the bottle, breaking my own rule not to drink during an operation, but I needed something to dull the shock, just one portion, to collect my thoughts. Then I returned to work. Now I knew what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a human trafficking network. It was a cult, a religion for perverts who had turned violence into a form of elite entertainment. And I was going to destroy it. The prosecutor's daughter abduction. After a week of continuous observation, I noticed a change in Lauren's routine. She met twice with 2 men at a cafe across from the city courthouse, a place that hadn't previously figured in her routes. The men looked like professional bodyguards, short haircuts, concealed weapons under their jackets, constant scanning of the surroundings. Their military bearing revealed special training, high-class mercenaries. I set up a directional microphone at a neighboring table and recorded their conversation. "She takes the same route home every day," said one of the men with a slight Eastern European accent. "Through the park, then past the schoolyard. There's an excellent blind spot between cameras, a 40-second window." Lauren handed him an envelope. "Half now, half after delivery. The client emphasizes no damage. He wants her in perfect condition." "She's not the first prosecutor's daughter in our collection," smirked the second bodyguard, "but definitely the youngest." Lauren frowned. That's not your business, just do the job cleanly. And remember, if she's found, they'll find you too. I felt cold. They were planning an abduction. I needed to find out who they were talking about. After the meeting, I followed the bodyguards. They got into an inconspicuous gray minivan and headed to a residential area in the northern part of the city. They stopped opposite a private school with a sign reading St. Agnes Academy, Leadership and Tradition. Change of observation position, binoculars at maximum magnification, and I saw the object of their attention. A young girl about 17 with dark hair gathered in a neat ponytail, dressed in a school uniform. She was talking with a group of friends, laughing, unaware of the threat hanging over her. Returning to the operations base, I quickly identified her. Emily Caulfield, daughter of Michael Caulfield, the district attorney leading a high-profile case against a drug cartel. Emily was supposed to be a key witness. She had accidentally recorded a conversation between drug dealers on her phone during a party. It all made sense. The abduction was planned not only as an act of revenge, but also as a way to stop the investigation. And Lauren's phrase about a client who wants her in perfect condition indicated that the girl faced a fate worse than death. She was to become part of their perverted collection. I had less than 24 hours to prevent the abduction. I could have anonymously warned the police, but after discovering Agent Harris's involvement in the network, I didn't know who could be trusted. Emily needed protection, and I was the only one who could provide it. The next day, I took up an observation position in the park through which, according to the bodyguard's information, Emily returned home. Dressed as an ordinary jogger, with a baseball cap hiding my face, I remained inconspicuous but ready for action. At 3:45 p.m., I saw the bodyguards. They parked the minivan at the edge of the schoolyard and took up positions perfectly controlling the girl's route. Professionals who knew their business. At 4:10 p.m., Emily appeared. She walked alone, listening to music through headphones, an ideal target, distracted and vulnerable. The bodyguards began to close in, moving from opposite directions to block escape routes. Their movements were polished, smooth, people accustomed to operating unnoticed. There was no time for a complex plan. I had to act. Armed confrontation. I checked the mask in my sports jacket pocket. A simple black balaclava, nothing special, but enough to conceal my face. I calculated the interception trajectory. If I accelerated now, I could position myself between the bodyguards and Emily at the moment of their approach. One of the bodyguards had already approached the girl, pretending to ask for directions. A classic distraction. The second approached from behind, holding a syringe with a sedative, standard tactics for abduction. I sprang into action, instantly transitioning from a light jog to a full sprint. Silent movement skills, honed by years of special forces training, allowed me to cover the distance soundlessly, despite the speed. The first bodyguard noticed the movement in his peripheral vision, but too late. I was already in an ideal attack position, from behind, at an angle that prevented him from reaching his weapon. Carotid artery hold, a classic technique. Right arm encircles the neck, elbow supports one side of the throat, forearm the other, compression directed at the arteries, not the trachea. When properly executed, the opponent loses consciousness within 6-8 seconds due to disrupted blood flow to the brain, without risk of fatality. The first bodyguard went limp in my arms, not even having time to cry out. I carefully lowered him to the ground and instantly turned to the second. He proved more prepared. Seeing his colleague neutralized, he discarded the syringe and reached for the pistol under his jacket. Simultaneously, he pushed Emily toward the minivan, where a driver was already waiting with the door open. I assessed the situation in fractions of a second. Emily was screaming, not understanding what was happening. The bodyguard had almost drawn his pistol. There was no time for subtle work. Launching forward and to the side, I used a parked van as a shield from a possible shot. I had a second while he adjusted his aim. That was enough to close the distance and deliver a series of strikes to vulnerable points: spleen, liver, neck. The man was well trained, but not at my level. His gun hand hung limply after a precise strike to the nerve plexus. His eyes widened with shock. He clearly hadn't expected to meet an opponent of his caliber. We exchanged several more blows. He used Krav Maga technique. I responded with a combination of systema and military hand-to-hand combat. The final blow landed in the solar plexus. The opponent doubled over, losing the ability to breathe for several crucial seconds. That was enough to end the fight. A series of controlled strikes to key points, and the second bodyguard joined the first in an unconscious state. Emily, frozen with terror, looked at me with wide-open eyes. Who are you? What's happening?" "No time to explain," I replied, trying to alter my voice. "These men wanted to kidnap you. Run straight to the police station, don't stop. Demand to meet with the police chief personally, don't trust anyone else, especially from the FBI. Say it's related to your father's case." "But how did you—" "Run now." My tone left no room for discussion. The girl nodded and ran toward the main street. I made sure she was out of sight, then quickly searched the unconscious men, confiscating their phones and weapons. As I was about to leave, the first bodyguard began regaining consciousness. He struggled to focus his gaze, and at that moment I realized my mask had slipped. Part of my face was visible. "Now I've remembered you, soldier," he rasped, looking into my eyes. "I could have killed him. It would have been easier, but that's not why I left the army." "Remember well," I replied, pulling up my mask. "And tell your masters, every girl they try to take I will return, every single one." A blow to the jaw sent him back into unconsciousness. I quickly left the scene, dissolving among pedestrians before anyone had time to call the police. The rescue operation was successful, but I understood. The war had only just begun. The hunt begins. The phone in my hiding place vibrated 40 minutes after the incident. The tracking device I had installed in Lauren's phone showed a sharp change en route. She urgently left a business meeting and was heading to Studio Elysium. I quickly activated the interception of her phone conversations. "What do you mean, some military type?" Her voice sounded cold and sharp, without the softness she used at home. "Are you sure it wasn't just a random passerby?" A pause, then even more tensely. "Professional techniques, former special forces or something like that. And where is the girl now?" Another pause, then a furious whisper. "In police custody, under protection. Do you understand that now we won't be able to get to her? The client will be furious." Throwing the phone on the table, I quickly reviewed the surveillance camera system I had installed in our house. Lauren returned an hour later, her movements nervous, abrupt, unlike her usual calculating grace. She went straight to my study and began methodically going through papers. She knew the attacker had military training and was checking her suspicions. I felt a chill down my spine. The cover was threatened. A perfectly executed operation still left a trail that could lead to me. Returning home for dinner, I played the role of an unsuspecting husband. Lauren was flawless as always. She prepared pasta carbonara, my favorite dish, asked about work, smiled at the right moments. But in her eyes I saw a calculating gleam. She was observing, analyzing my every movement. "Did you see the news?" she asked casually, handing me a glass of wine. "Some madman attacked 2 men near St. Agnes School." "Really?" I made a surprised face. "No one was killed?" "No, just beat them up and fled. Strange that it happened in such a prosperous area. The prosecutor's daughter goes to school there." I shrugged. "The city is becoming more dangerous. Maybe we should move to the countryside. I've always dreamed of a house in the forest." "That's sweet, darling." The smile didn't reach her eyes. "But you know my work is tied to the city." After dinner, I went to my workshop, supposedly to work on a new order. In reality, I needed to check the situation around Studio Elysium. Remote access to cameras showed unusual activity, increased security, the arrival of several sturdy men with military bearing, clearly mercenaries. They were preparing for war. Returning to base, I intercepted a phone conversation between Lauren and Frederick. "We showed the attacker's photo to our man," said Frederick. "He swears the resemblance is almost perfect. That's exactly who he saw under the balaclava." "You think it's him?" Lauren's voice sounded tense. "Too big a coincidence, don't you think? Right after the theft of paintings from his workshop, there's a professional attack on our people." "But how could he know? I was extremely careful." "That doesn't matter. What matters is that if it really is him, we can turn the situation to our advantage." "What do you mean?" "A special forces operative in our collection, that's unique merchandise. Imagine what a performance we can arrange. An elite warrior trained to survive in any conditions against our best entertainment specialists. Clients will pay millions to see him break." A short pause, then Lauren laughed dryly. "You've always been able to see opportunities where others see problems. All right, I'll find out if he knows anything." The conversation ended, but a minute later the system intercepted another call. Lauren was dialing a number that wasn't in my database. "It's me," she said quietly. "Need to prepare a backup plan. Dovier suspects my husband. And who knows, maybe he'll decide to eliminate me. Yes, cards, documents, everything as usual. When it's all over, I need a new passport and a one-way ticket." A pause, then even more quietly. "Dovier is too dangerous, and my husband. Now he's definitely just a walking corpse. He can serve as a distraction for the feds while I take the money." I turned off the recording and leaned back in my chair. The situation was developing faster than I had anticipated. Lauren was preparing to betray everyone, both me and her accomplices. She planned to use me as bait to escape with the money. I smiled in the darkness. Let her think she's in control. Let her believe I'm a blind man who can't see the trap. This overconfidence will be her fatal mistake. Looking at the wall with photographs, maps, and diagrams, I felt the familiar chill before an operation. The hunt had begun. But this time, the hunter and prey constantly changed places, creating a deadly dance of deception. I closed my eyes and remembered the images from the paintings: girls with fear in their eyes, merchandise evaluation, perverted performances. All this had to end. Checkmate in 3 moves, and one of us would not survive. Chapter III, Underground Gallery. In Special Forces, we were taught, when the enemy knows about your existence, change everything: position, tactics, behavior patterns. Now I was in the crosshairs. Lauren and Dovier suspected me but weren't certain. This gave a small advantage that needed to be used immediately. One wrong step, and the hunter would become the prey. However, sometimes becoming bait is the best way to lure a predator into a trap. Unexpected ally. Returning to my operations base in the evening, I noticed signs of surveillance. A black SUV that appeared twice at the intersections of my route. The distance and maneuvers revealed a professional, kept far enough not to arouse suspicion, but never lost sight. Instead of driving to the storage unit, I performed standard counter-surveillance maneuvers: sharp turns, unexpected stops, running yellow lights. The pursuer kept up, meaning my hideout was compromised. I activated an emergency evacuation protocol, sending an encrypted message to the automated system at the storage unit. Within 30 minutes, all electronic data would be copied to a backup server. Then the hard drives would self-destruct. Physical evidence, the paintings and documents, would have to be abandoned. Too risky to return. I needed a new hideout, and quickly. I remembered an abandoned art supplies warehouse in the old industrial district. A familiar place. My mother took me there as a child when old Kowalski, a passionate collector of rare pigments, was the owner. After his death, the warehouse remained abandoned, a perfect shelter for someone who needs to disappear. Arriving via circuitous routes, I made sure no one was following me and entered through a dormer window on the roof. Inside, it smelled of dust, old paint, and linseed oil, scents that awakened memories of my mother leaning over a canvas with a brush in hand. I looked around, using a tactical flashlight in minimal illumination mode. A large space with high ceilings, sturdy concrete columns, metal shelves stacked with rusting cans of paints and solvents. Perfect acoustics for early detection of approaching footsteps, multiple exits through loading platforms, fire resistance due to the concrete structure. Setting up a temporary camp behind massive wooden crates, I began planning my next steps. I took out a backup laptop from a waterproof container, activated a secure connection, and began checking the surveillance systems installed in the house Lauren and I shared. A slight rustle from the right made me instantly turn off the screen and freeze. The sound didn't repeat, but instincts screamed danger. Someone had been here before me. Silently drawing a pistol with a silencer, I moved along the wall, transferring weight from heel to toe, a silent movement technique perfected in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Another sound, a light creak of a floorboard, revealed the approximate location of the uninvited guest. With a swift movement, I rounded the corner, holding the pistol in the Weaver stance, both arms extended, stable position for an accurate shot. A figure was frozen in the dark corner of the warehouse. "Don't move," I said quietly, "hands where I can see them." The figure slowly raised its hands. In the dim light filtering through dirty windows, I made out a woman. Thin, emaciated, but with unnaturally straight posture. In her hand, she clutched an improvised weapon, a broken bottle, the jagged edges of which gleamed in the semi-darkness. "Are you from Elysium?" she asked with surprising calmness for someone at whom a gun was pointed. "Did Frederick send you to finish the job?" I didn't lower my weapon but slightly loosened my grip. "I have nothing to do with Frederick Dovier. Who are you?" "Someone who won't return to the cage alive." She slightly shifted her weight, preparing to attack. The movement revealed training, not professional combat but some special physical discipline. "If you're after me, better shoot right away. I won't go without a fight." "I'm not after you." I slowly lowered the pistol, demonstrating peaceful intentions. "I'm here to hide from the same people as you, apparently." Distrust in her eyes gave way to cautious interest. "Prove it." I thought for a moment, then gestured toward my backpack. "There's something in there that might convince you. I'll take it out slowly." Receiving a slight nod, I opened the backpack and extracted one of the photographs. A printout of a clean painting showing naked girls lined up for evaluation. The woman flinched seeing the image. Her eyes widened, her hand with the bottle trembled. "Where did you get this?" Her voice became hoarse. "Found it under layers of paint on canvases from Studio Elysium. I'm investigating their activities. They sell women as merchandise, disguising it as elite art." The woman intensely examined my face, as if looking for signs of deception. Then she noticed other photographs peeking out from the backpack, and her gaze caught on an image of Lauren. "You know her?" she asked, nodding at the photo. "My wife," I answered dryly. "Or rather, I thought I knew her. Turns out for 5 years I've been sleeping next to a monster." This phrase seemed to break something in her defenses. She lowered the bottle and slowly sat down on the nearest crate. In the dim light, I noticed scars on her wrists, characteristic marks from prolonged wearing of handcuffs. "My name is Claire," she said finally. "Claire Montgomery. 2 years ago, I was a concert pianist. Then your wife saw me performing at a provincial theater and offered a prestigious job at a private studio." She smiled bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to play Chopin while someone is being violated in front of you? I didn't just see all this. I was part of their diabolical orchestra. the musical backdrop to a nightmare. I holstered my pistol and sat across from her, maintaining distance, didn't want to pressure her. How did you escape? They underestimated my hands, she raised her palms. Long pianist's fingers, unnaturally strong with calluses on the pads. They decided that since I'm a musician, I must be weak. But do you know how much pressure is needed to press piano keys for fortissimo? What kind of forearm muscles must be developed for hours-long concerts? Claire demonstrated a quick finger movement resembling a piano scale. I waited 6 months, studied their system, memorized the guard schedule. Then, during transportation to a special event, I used a hairpin to open the handcuffs. 16 seconds for the lock, 2 seconds for a strike to the convoy guard's throat. In these words and movements, I recognized the familiar discipline of a fighter, not innate, but developed through experience of survival in extreme conditions. And you've been hiding since then. And gathering information, she nodded. Tracking network members, recording names, addresses, habits, waiting for a moment when I could strike, or find someone who would strike for me. Our eyes met, and I saw in hers the same cold flame of vengeance that burned within me. Seems we're both hunting the same prey, I said. Looks that way, she smiled slightly for the first time. Special forces, right? Former, now I'm a restorer. Former pianist, former special forces operator, she shook her head. We're both repainted canvases, but the underlying layers can't be hidden. Combining information. By dawn, cautious trust had been established between us. Claire, of course, didn't tell me everything, nor did I expect her to. Survivors of captivity keep parts of themselves closed off. It's a protective mechanism. But she shared information that proved invaluable. Elysium isn't just a human trafficking network, she explained as we hung my salvaged photographs and notes on an improvised data wall. It's a cult. Frederick sees himself as some kind of artistic revolutionary. He doesn't just sell women for sex, that's too banal for his ego. He creates what he calls living installations. Performance art with deadly outcome. I nodded grimly, remembering records of the performances. Exactly. He has a complex system for classifying material. Ordinary slaves, the lowest category, sold in bulk to clients from third-world countries. The middle category, exhibits for private collections of wealthy perverts. And the highest category, installations, those who participate in his performances. Claire spoke about the slave trade system with the analytical detachment of a scientist describing a virus. I understood this mechanism, dissociation, a way to cope with trauma by separating it from oneself. And where were you in this system? I asked carefully. Special category, her fingers involuntarily began moving, imitating playing on invisible keys. Orchestra, people with special talents who provide atmosphere for performances. Musicians, lighting technicians, makeup artists. We weren't sold but weren't considered human either, more like living instruments. We were part of the performance. I showed her my findings, decrypted client lists, movement maps, phone conversation recordings. She, in turn, told me about the internal structure of the organization. Frederick is the brain and face, the public figure. Under his command are 5 regional directors. Your wife is one of them, responsible for recruitment and initial selection. There's also a financial director, security director, logistics director, and a director for VIP client relations. Classic corporate structure, I noted, like in any business. For them it is a business, Claire shrugged. With accounting, reporting, corporate ethics, quarterly meetings, annual bonuses for good performance. Once I played at such a meeting, they discussed merchandise shrinkage percentage and conditioning costs. They talked about living people as if they were a shipment of fruit. Joint analysis revealed a complete picture of the operation scale. An international network with centers in 10 countries. Annual turnover in hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of victims. The system is protected from all sides, I said, studying the list of corrupted officials. Police, FBI, judges, politicians. Official channels are useless. I know, Claire nodded. 6 months ago, I tried to contact a journalist who was investigating cases of missing women. A week later, she was found with a heroin overdose. Official version, suicide due to depression. She had no history of drug use. We continued comparing data, and I noticed an announcement in one of the photographs taken near Studio Elysium. An advertising banner for a private museum of contemporary art. Exclusive closed exhibition transformation. One evening, one opportunity. For the selected few only. Claire, looking at the photo, paled. This is a code message. Transformation is their term for a large-scale operation to relocate merchandise and documentation. It happens once a year when they change their main base. Are you sure? Absolutely. I played at such exhibitions twice. They gather everything in one place, assets, records, cash, before redistribution to new locations. It's the only moment when the entire organization's leadership and all evidence are under one roof. We exchanged glances, understanding the significance of this information. This was a chance, perhaps the only one, to deliver a decisive blow to the entire organization in one stroke. When is the exhibition? I asked, already considering infiltration options. Claire pointed to the date on the banner. The day after tomorrow. We have less than 48 hours to prepare. Risky plan. We need to understand the building layout, security system, number of guards. I paced between crates, systematizing tasks in my mind. Without inside information, we're blind. Claire watched me with a thoughtful expression. Finally, she quietly said, "There is a way to get this information." I stopped, noticing determination in her eyes. I have to go back to them. What? I couldn't believe my ears. That's suicide. They'll kill you on the spot. They won't, she shook her head. Frederick spent 2 years turning me into a perfect instrument. Do you know how difficult it is to find a high-class pianist capable of playing hours-long performances while remaining sane, watching what happens 3 meters away from you? Who knows how to adjust tempo and tonality to screams of pain? Her words emanated icy calmness, making it truly chilling. I'll say I was too scared after escaping, that the outside world proved more frightening than captivity, that I want back into the safety of structure. She said this so convincingly that I momentarily believed her. Dovier values my talent. He's more likely to believe I broke down and returned than to kill me without a chance for a final performance. I shook my head. Too risky. Even if they don't kill you immediately, they'll torture you to find out who you contacted, where you were hiding. Of course they will, she agreed with frightening imperturbability. But not right away. First, they'll want to make sure I'm telling the truth about returning. They'll need my music for the exhibition. Transformation is always a grand spectacle, the culmination of the year, where they demonstrate new techniques to VIP clients. Even if they believe you, they'll be constantly watching you. How will you transmit information? During preparation for the exhibition, I'll have access to the building layout. I'll be able to see the placement of guards, security systems, possibly even documentation on transportation. I'll memorize everything. A musician's memory is trained to remember multi-page scores at a glance. I could see she was adamant, but the idea of sending her back into the monster's den seemed unacceptable. There must be another way. There is no other way, she stood up, and I noticed a change in her posture. A steely determination appeared. This is my choice, Mike. For the first time in a long time, I can decide my own fate. Don't take that right away from me. Her words touched something deep inside. I remembered my own thoughts after returning from captivity in Syria. How important it was to regain control, even if it meant taking risks. All right, I conceded, but we need to think through all the details. Signals, emergency routes, evacuation plan. The next few hours, we developed the operation with the thoroughness of military planning. I insisted on additional precautions. Here's a miniature smoke charge. I showed her a device disguised as a cufflink for a piano performance. When activated, it releases dense white smoke without odor, non-toxic but creates heavy smoke screen. Use only in extreme cases if you realize you've been discovered or if you're in imminent danger. And you, she asked, attaching the device to her cuff. When you activate it, I'll have 30 seconds to start acting. I'll be near the museum, ready to enter at your signal. We rehearsed scenarios, discussed details, worked through backup plans. But we both understood that once Claire entered Studio Elysium, she would be alone against an entire organization of killers and slave traders. When everything was ready, an awkward pause arose between us. The upcoming operation could be our last, and we both realized it. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You could just disappear, start a new life somewhere far away." Claire was silent for a long time, then quietly said, "When I was in captivity, they gave me sedatives to keep me from resisting. Once the dose was too large and I experienced clinical death. Do you know what I saw in those 46 seconds while they were bringing me back to life?" I shook my head. "Nothing, absolute nothingness." Her voice became detached. "And I realized that the gods, if they exist, have turned away from us, that there is no higher justice, no cosmic balance. There is only what we do here and now." She looked me straight in the eyes. "I'm not doing this for justice. I'm doing this because if they aren't stopped, they'll continue. And every girl they capture after I've turned away will be on my conscience." I understood her. Understood too well. The same feeling haunted me after every military operation where we didn't manage to save everyone. "I trust you more than anyone in the last 3 years," she added quietly. This wasn't sentimentality, but a statement of fact, and perhaps the highest form of trust a person who has experienced what she can express. Return to the den. The next morning, we put the plan into action. I watched from a distance as Claire approached Studio Elysium. Her appearance was carefully considered. Clothes slightly wrinkled but not too dirty, hair unkempt but not neglected, her face bearing an expression of tired submission. The image of someone who had fought but surrendered. The security at the entrance tensed seeing her. One immediately reached for his weapon, the other grabbed a radio. Claire slowly raised her hands, demonstrating no threat, and said something. Through a powerful directional microphone, I caught a fragment. "Tell Mr. Dovier his pianist has returned to finish the sonata." They led her inside. I remained in observation position, nervously clutching the receiver tuned to the transmitter frequency and the smoke grenade. If Claire activated it immediately, it meant the operation had failed, and I would have to improvise a rescue mission. An hour passed in agonizing waiting, then a second. No signals, neither emergency nor encouraging. At the beginning of the third hour, my secure phone vibrated. The message came through an encrypted channel we had established in case Claire gained access to a computer or phone. Primary interrogation passed. Meeting with F in 20 minutes. Cameras in every corner, guards armed with HK automatic pistols, shift change every 4 hours. So they hadn't killed her immediately. But there was no information on whether Frederick believed her story. 2 more hours of tense waiting, and the phone came alive again. "F has taken me back. Conditions: intimacy with him, complete submission, constant observation until the exhibition. Preparation for transformation in full swing. F calls it his magnum opus." I felt a surge of relief, but immediately suppressed it. We had overcome only the first obstacle. Claire was inside, but forced to endure abuse from this villain and still in mortal danger. Over the next few hours, messages came in short, coded fragments. Museum, 3-story building with basement. Main exhibition on first floor, VIP rooms on second, administrative offices on third. Basement divided into storage and technical area. Security, 24 people, rotating positions, radio check every 15 minutes. Armed with light automatic weapons, sniper on roof of adjacent building. Biometric access to key areas, fingerprint and retina scanners. Backup generators in case of power failure. Planning evacuation immediately after exhibition. Merchandise and documentation to be moved in trucks with catering company logo. The information was invaluable but incomplete. Claire couldn't move freely around the building. Many areas remained unexplored. Finally, the last message came, making me go cold inside. Performance scheduled for tomorrow, 9 p.m. Says it will be my last concert. I will be the final chord of the evening. He plans to end my performance permanently. The words left no room for interpretation. Frederick was planning to kill Claire as part of his perverted performance. Perhaps he didn't fully believe her story about returning, or more likely, decided that her betrayal deserved public punishment, transformed into art. I sent a brief confirmation that I understood the information and began intensive preparation. I had less than 24 hours to develop a plan for infiltration, rescuing Claire, and gathering evidence against the organization. Time was running out, but now I had a goal clearer than ever. Not just to destroy a criminal network, but to save a woman who had risked everything to help me in this mission. Preparation for the gala evening. I spent the day before the operation in methodical preparation. First, I went on reconnaissance around the museum, a 3-story modernist building with a glass and concrete facade. I circled the perimeter, noting the positions of surveillance cameras, motion sensors, entry and exit points. According to Claire's information, the main entrance would be equipped with special scanners. The organizers didn't want to let people in with weapons or recording devices. The back entrance was controlled by security with a biometric access system. But on the western side of the building, I discovered a technical area, a ventilation shaft under reconstruction. Workers were finishing the installation of a new air conditioning system for the upcoming exhibition, a perfect infiltration point. I took several photographs from different angles, then retreated and observed the changing of the guards. Every 4 hours, as Claire had reported. Professional discipline, but therein lay a weakness. Predictability creates vulnerability. Returning to the warehouse, I prepared my equipment. Nothing superfluous, only the necessary minimum to maintain mobility. Pistol with silencer, Sig Sauer P226 with a tactical silencer minimizing flash and sound. 2 spare magazines. 3 combat knives, primary on the thigh, backup in the boot, third horizontally at the lower back. Set of lock picks and electronic breakers for overcoming electronic locks. Light Kevlar protection under clothing. Won't stop a direct bullet hit, but will soften the impact and protect against fragments. 4 flashbang grenades with minimal blast radius for creating diversions. Tactical flashlight with infrared mode and night vision goggles. I disguised the equipment under my clothing. Black cargo pants with multiple hidden pockets, dark shirt, and leather jacket, loose enough to conceal weapons but not so bulky as to hinder movement. Towards evening, I noticed unusual activity at the museum. Arrival of elite vehicles with foreign license plates, security reinforcement, unloading of equipment in special cases. Clients were gathering for the exhibition, and with them, technicians for the performance. My communication device came alive again, the last message from Claire. They're preparing me for the performance. Security tripled. External doors blocked by biometric locks. Frederick has announced this as his magnum opus. Most of the collection will be moved immediately after the event. Then, after a pause, another short message came. If it doesn't work out, no, this was my choice, and it was worth it. Now I must go to him again. These words resonated in me with a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. Claire was taking a mortal risk not because of me, but I felt responsible for her. She had become not just an ally in this mission, but someone important, a person who understood the part of me that remained invisible to others. Among the arriving vehicles, I noticed a familiar one, Lauren's silver BMW. She looked tense, constantly looking around, checking her phone. Movements nervous, abrupt, unlike her usual restraint. I remembered her last phone conversation I had intercepted. When it's all over, I need a new passport and a one-way ticket. She was planning an escape, possibly tonight after the exhibition. The sun began to set, time to act. I placed beacons at emergency exits, miniature devices that sent a signal if a door opened. Prepared diversionary devices, simple mechanisms creating short circuits in the electrical network in remote parts of the building. An hour before the event, I infiltrated the museum's utility rooms through a service entrance, using a fake technical personnel ID. The guard barely glanced at the documents. All attention was focused on VIP guests arriving through the main entrance. Taking shelter among stored equipment, I observed the arrival of guests through surveillance cameras I had connected to via tablet. Faces were hidden behind elegant masks, but posture revealed status: politicians, businessmen, celebrities, people whose position placed them above the law, people willing to pay for the privilege of watching human suffering as a form of art. My gaze stopped on a monitor showing the interior of the main exhibition hall. There, on the stage, they were setting up a concert grand piano, and next to it, metal constructions resembling medieval torture devices, stylized as modern sculptures. My heart tightened at the thought that in a few hours Claire would be there at the center of this nightmare. But it was too late to retreat. The plan was launched, and only death could stop it. Infiltration into the Gallery of Horrors. Exactly at 9 p.m., the gala performance began. I positioned myself near the ventilation shaft, waiting for the moment of the security shift change. Music coming from the main hall sounded muted, solemn classical pieces creating an atmosphere of a cultural evening. The hypocrisy of this situation was nauseating. People considering themselves society's elite gathered to enjoy the suffering of abducted women under the guise of avant-garde art. At 9:15, when the guards were distracted by the arrival of another VIP guest, I slipped to the ventilation shaft. Using a screwdriver and a small lever, I removed the technical panel and entered inside. The ventilation was spacious enough for someone of my build, but barely. Any careless movement threatened to reveal my presence with noise. Moving through the narrow labyrinth of ventilation required extreme concentration. Dust, cobwebs, sharp angles of metal joints. I had to move slowly, transferring weight from one support point to another to avoid creating vibrations. At one of the narrow turns, I felt an attack of claustrophobia. The space narrowed so much that my chest barely fit through. A flash of panic, cold sweat, rapid breathing. The memory of being held in a tight cage in Syria momentarily paralyzed me. Get it together, Mike. Inhale, exhale, count. The PTSD control technique worked, and I continued moving. Through ventilation grills, I could observe what was happening in the halls. The first hall, a standard exhibition of contemporary art, outwardly unremarkable. The second, more explicit works, but still within the bounds of decency. But with each hall, the exposition became increasingly disturbing. In the third hall, I saw living exhibits, young women in stylized glass cages, dressed in avant-garde costumes that barely covered their bodies. They stood motionless like mannequins, eyes empty, movements mechanical. Guests examined them, nodded approvingly, made notes in elegant notebooks. It was an auction disguised as an artistic performance. I continued advancing, orienting by the sounds of music that were becoming louder. According to the building plan obtained from Claire, the main exhibition hall should be located in the center of the building. Finally, I reached a grill opening into a technical passage behind the main hall stage. I carefully unscrewed the fasteners and slipped out of the ventilation. Here were the automatic systems for controlling lighting and sound. No technical personnel present. Everything was set to a pre-programmed mode. From behind heavy velvet curtains, I could see the stage and part of the hall. The luxurious space was designed as a mixture of art gallery and theater. In the center, a concert grand piano. Around it, strange metal constructions resembling both sculptures and torture devices. Spectators in elegant evening attire and masks sat in a semicircle on leather chairs. Champagne, quiet conversations, impeccable etiquette, as if at a premiere in an opera house. At this moment, Frederick Dovier stepped onto the stage, a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccable suit. His movements were polished, aristocratic. He raised his hand, calling for silence, and began his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have gathered to celebrate the true essence of art, the moment when beauty and pain become indistinguishable. His voice sounded melodic, hypnotic. The audience listened with respectful attention. Our final performance of this evening is a special gift for connoisseurs. The return of the prodigal daughter, if you will, he smiled at his joke. A talent that escaped but was returned to our community. An artist who tried to deny her purpose but realized that true art requires complete self-sacrifice. A gesture of his hand, and Claire was led onto the stage. She was dressed in a long black dress, her hair styled in a severe updo. The paleness of her face accentuated the dark circles under her eyes, but she carried herself with dignity. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her place at the piano. Our pianist will perform Chopin's revolutionary etude today, Frederick continued. A piece written in a burst of anger and despair, perfect for what will follow. For after the music, the real performance will begin, the final appearance of our dear Claire, her swan song, if you will. A quiet laugh rippled through the hall. The audience understood the meaning of his words. This wouldn't be just a concert. It would be an execution, transformed into a performance. Claire began to play. The first chords of the revolutionary etude filled the hall, powerful, passionate, filled with the fury that Chopin had put into this music. Her fingers moved across the keys with incredible speed and precision, extracting from the instrument sounds that seemed to reflect all the pain and anger in the world. I watched her, holding my breath. Claire had completely given herself to the music, eyes closed, body slightly swaying to the rhythm. But behind this dedication, I noticed an almost imperceptible movement of her left hand. She unobtrusively touched the cufflink on her sleeve. After a few seconds, smoke began rising from under the piano lid, first in a thin stream, then increasingly dense. The audience initially thought it was part of the performance, a theatrical effect to enhance the drama. Frederick frowned, clearly not expecting this element. He took a step toward the stage, but at that moment the smoke became so thick that it filled most of the hall. Panic began, guests jumped from their seats, some rushed to the exits. Security tried to restore order. Amid the chaos, I heard Frederick's voice cutting through the noise. This is part of the performance. Art should provoke anxiety. But it was too late. The smoke screen created perfect cover. I kicked out the grill and silently descended into the side passage. The operation had begun. Chapter IV, Canvas of Retribution. Smoke, chaos, Chopin's music abruptly cut off on a high note. This is how my final battle began. For 5 years I had tried to escape violence, seeking redemption and restoring what was destroyed. Now I was returning to what I knew best, destruction. But this time the purpose was different, not following orders but saving the innocent. And among them, a woman whose music, even in a moment of absolute danger, sounded like the perfect overture to a symphony of vengeance. Chaos and artistic chaos. The smoke screen spread through the hall with unexpected speed, creating whimsical foggy figures in the spotlight. Guests scrambled in panic, some trying to maintain dignity, others rushing toward exits, bumping into each other. Frederick, realizing he was losing control of the situation, shouted over the noise, "This is part of the performance. Art should provoke anxiety. Security to your positions." I used the first seconds of confusion to neutralize two guards in the service corridor. Their attention was fixed on what was happening in the hall, allowing me to approach from behind. A quick strike with the edge of my hand to the base of the skull for the first, a chokehold for the second, quiet, effective, non-lethal. Taking their weapons and communication devices, I gained access to security conversations. All posts, activate Eclipse protocol, perimeter lock, Alpha team to the main hall, Beta, VIP guest protection, Gamma, ensure merchandise evacuation through Tunnel B. Now I knew their plans. I remotely activated previously planted devices. A series of short circuits in different parts of the building forced the security system to direct some guards to check the sources. Through the earpiece, I heard growing panic in their communications. Post 3, fire in the East Wing. Post 7, video surveillance system failure in Sector C. All posts, possible infiltration. Repeat, possible infiltration. Stay in position, sending rapid response team. Security divided, giving me the opportunity to infiltrate the security zone where the exhibits were kept. Young women locked in stylized cages, awaiting their fate to be sold after the performance. First cage, a girl no older than 20, bound with decorative but fully functional silver handcuffs. Romanian accent, eyes wide with fear. "Are you police?" she whispered when I broke the lock. "No, but I'm here to get you out. Can you walk?" She nodded. I freed 4 more girls from neighboring cages, briefly explained the route to the emergency exit. Third corridor to the right, then down the stairs. The door is unlocked. Go outside and run straight to the police station on Main Street. Don't stop, don't separate. The oldest of the girls, with a determined look, took on the role of leader. "We'll help the others. How many cages in total?" "I don't know exactly. Be careful. The guards are armed and nervous." Leaving them to rescue the others, I moved deeper into the building. On the way, I encountered the first serious resistance. 2 guards from the elite corps, in black tactical uniforms with professional weapons. They noticed me simultaneously. No chance to use the element of surprise. I had to improvise. In the abstract art gallery where we collided, there stood a massive marble sculpture of a nude figure. I used it as cover from the first shots, then as leverage to topple the heavy structure onto one of the attackers. He managed to jump away but lost his balance. That was enough to close the distance. In close combat, their advantage in firepower was neutralized. I intercepted an arm with a pistol, twisted the wrist until it cracked, simultaneously using the momentum for a headbutt to the opponent's face. He fell like he was cut down. The second proved more experienced, keeping his distance. The gallery space transformed into a strange battlefield. I moved between installations, using a heavy picture frame to block strikes when he tried to use a tactical knife. The final chord of this fight, an overturned glass display case creating a barrier of shards which the guard tried to break through. A fatal mistake. One wrong move, a foot slipping in polished shoes, and his own momentum led to a collision with a large shard. Fatal. I moved on, past exhibitions that combined real art with images of torture, past recording equipment documenting performances for later sale in closed networks. I methodically disabled cameras, removed hard drives. All this was not only evidence but also a tool for blackmailing high-ranking clients. The alert system announced emergency evacuation, but many guests were trapped due to security protocol activation. A perfect trap. Those who came to enjoy the suffering of others now found themselves caged and panicking. Moving toward the central hall, I searched for Claire. After activating the smoke bomb, she had disappeared from the stage. She might have tried to escape on her own, but an inner voice suggested she wouldn't leave until she finished what she started. I shared that feeling. Lauren makes a decision. Making my way through the labyrinth of exhibition halls, I stopped at a security room where monitors showed what was happening in various parts of the building. On one of them, I saw Lauren. She was moving quickly through service areas toward the basement. Not the panicked flight of a frightened woman, but the purposeful movement of someone with a plan. Of course it's him. Who else could create such chaos? Military training is obvious. She turned around as if sensing observation. I need to get to the vault. All documents, records, money, everything's there. I instantly understood her intentions. She wasn't planning to help her accomplices. She was going to flee, taking the most valuable items while everyone was distracted by security issues. Classic rat behavior, leaving the sinking ship first, with maximum spoils. I quickly determined where the basement vault was located using the building layout obtained from Claire. 2 levels down, through the administration zone, past technical rooms. There, according to information, were stored not only documents but also top-category merchandise, the most valuable captives, intended for special clients. The decision formed instantly. Allow Lauren to reach the vault first. Let her start collecting evidence and preparing it for transport. I would intercept her there, gaining access to everything at once. A strategically sound move. As I forged a path to the basement, the security system continued to record my diversions. The voice in the earpiece captured from a guard reported, "All posts, intruder detected in the East Wing, presumably former military, armed and dangerous. Shoot to kill. Repeat, shoot to kill." They knew about me, but couldn't accurately determine my location due to the failure of some surveillance systems. The advantage remained on my side. Through the service elevator for personnel, I descended to the level of technical rooms. It was quieter here. Emergency protocols had cut off this zone from the rest of the building to protect valuable materials. On the surveillance system monitor, I saw Lauren methodically collecting documents in the basement vault. She acted with cold efficiency, sorting papers, selecting hard drives with recordings, packing stacks of cash into a special tamper-proof case. A professional who had been preparing for this moment for months. Then something unexpected happened. She took out a canister of chemical reagent and began pouring it over shelves of remaining documents, destroying evidence. Lauren wasn't just planning to escape with the money. She wanted to destroy everything that could lead back to her after the organization's collapse. I quickened my pace, realizing I might lose valuable evidence. But approaching the vault, I noticed movement in a parallel corridor. Claire. She was also heading there, apparently with the same goal, to reach the evidence. Our eyes met through a glass partition. A second of recognition, a nod, silent confirmation of purpose. We entered from different sides, surrounding the vault. Lauren, busy destroying documents, didn't notice Claire appearing at the far entrance. But she heard my footsteps and turned sharply, pulling a pistol from a holster under her jacket. "Mike," her voice sounded surprisingly calm. "I should have guessed, always too principled for your own good." "Hello, Lauren." I kept my hands where she could see them but maintained readiness to act. "Or should I call you Elizabeth Price?" Her eyes narrowed. "So you know since when?" "Since those paintings. The ones stolen from my workshop. Interesting technique, by the way, painting over existing works. Almost like your life with me, a false layer over the real personality." She allowed herself a short laugh. "Don't tell me you're upset. We both know our marriage was a mutually beneficial arrangement. You got the appearance of normality, I got cover." Normality. Now it was my turn to laugh bitterly. "I really hope to start a new life, Lauren, a real one, but it's hard to build something genuine with a ghost." My gaze momentarily slipped past her shoulder. Claire was silently approaching, using shelves as cover. I needed to hold Lauren's attention. "Put the case down, Lauren," I said. "No one should leave with the evidence. Too many lives have been destroyed by this business." "And then what?" She gripped the pistol tighter. "Turn me over to the police. Tell them how your wife trafficked humans. You'll become a laughingstock, a brave special forces operator who noticed nothing for 5 years." At that moment, Lauren detected movement behind her. Claire was already too close. Instantaneous reaction, lightning fast turn, and Lauren grabbed Claire, putting a scalpel she had picked up from a nearby table to her throat. "What a touching couple," she hissed through her teeth. "My replacement, escaped property and ex-husband. What a lovely melodrama." The situation changed dramatically. Now Lauren held Claire in front of her as a human shield, slowly retreating toward the emergency exit. "She's coming with me," Lauren snapped. "Try to pursue, you'll get her with a slit throat." For a moment, Claire's eyes met mine. There was no fear in her gaze, only concentration and some decision. With a barely noticeable movement of her head, she signaled me not to intervene. She had a plan. "All right, Lauren," I slowly lowered my weapon. "Go, but know this, wherever you go, I'll find you." Lauren laughed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Mike. You think I'm alone. You believe you've destroyed everything. There are structures above, networks deeper. I'll disappear, turn into smoke, and vengeance will come from where you least expect." With these words, she began backing toward the exit, dragging Claire along. Triumvirate in the main hall. We were in a stalemate when the alert system suddenly changed its message. "Attention all personnel. Phoenix Protocol activated. Repeat, Phoenix Protocol. Evacuation time, 15 minutes. Lauren was momentarily distracted, her eyes widening. Damn Frederick, he activated the self-destruct system. This was the moment Claire had been waiting for. Her fingers moved with incredible speed and precision, pressing on nerve points in Lauren's arm. The movements were so fast they seemed blurred. Years of piano technique training had transformed into deadly accuracy. Lauren's hand reflexively opened from the sudden spasm. The scalpel clinked on the floor. That second was enough for me to cross the distance between us and neutralize Lauren. A precise strike to the solar plexus, then a hold blocking movement. "Are you okay?" I asked Claire, restraining the writhing Lauren. "Intact," she nodded, rubbing her neck. "But we have a problem. Phoenix isn't just evacuation. They've prepared charges throughout the building. Everything here will blow up in." She glanced at the clock, 14 minutes. "We need to get the captives out." I tightened my grip on the struggling Lauren. "Do you know how many are here?" "About 30 in total," Claire replied. "Most on the upper floors in exhibition halls, but some in special rooms. We've already released some." The vault door burst open with a crash. On the threshold stood Frederick Dovier himself, elegant even now, in the midst of catastrophe. Behind him loomed 2 guards with automatic weapons. "What drama!" exclaimed Frederick with unnatural enthusiasm. "Husband, wife, and lover, a classic triangle brought to life. This could have been a beautiful installation. Pity that circumstances force us to cut the performance short." "Frederick, cancel the self-destruct," Lauren hissed. "We can fix everything, rebuild the business elsewhere." Frederick shook his head, an almost paternal smile appearing on his face. "Dear Lauren, always so practical, but you don't understand. If I can't keep my collection, no one will get it." His voice suddenly became harsh. "You have 6 minutes to enjoy my greatest work, purification by fire." He took a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. The timer on the wall clock changed, showing an accelerated countdown. "What have you done?" Lauren exhaled. "Hasten the inevitable," Frederick shrugged. "Art demands a dramatic finale." He nodded to the guards and they raised their weapons. I reacted instantly, pushing Lauren toward them and diving behind a metal shelf. Claire darted in the opposite direction, hiding behind a column. A brief but intense shootout began. I used weapons captured earlier, trying not to waste bullets. Frederick retreated into the corridor, leaving the guards to deal with us. "Claire," I shouted, reloading the pistol, "we're stuck here. We need to get the captives out. You know the layout, lead them to the eastern exit. I'll find the last ones and catch up with you." Claire hesitated for a moment, then nodded, and taking advantage of the moment when the guards were reloading, darted toward the side exit. Lauren, using the commotion, also disappeared down one of the corridors, taking the case with documents. "Let's go," one guard shouted to the other. "The building's about to collapse." They retreated, leaving me in relative safety. The timer showed just over 5 minutes. I rushed to the upper floors, continuing to search for remaining captives. Most had already been freed by the first group of girls, but I found a few more in remote rooms, frightened, disoriented. I quickly explained the situation and directed them to the eastern exit. When the timer showed 3 minutes, I heard Claire's cry from the communicator. "Mike, one girl is missing, the youngest, almost a child. She should be in Frederick's personal room. He called her his final masterpiece." "Where is this room?" I asked, already racing down the corridor. "Third floor, west wing, room with a golden door. He keeps his special exhibits there." I changed direction, climbing up another floor. The building began to shake. The first charges on the lower levels had already detonated. Smoke filled the corridors, making breathing and visibility difficult. At the end of the corridor, I saw it, a massive door with gold trim, locked with an electronic lock. Several shots shattered the mechanism to pieces. Inside was a room of horrors, Frederick's personal gallery, where artworks intermingled with torture instruments. In the center stood a transparent capsule of bulletproof glass, inside which was a young girl, almost a teenager. She was unconscious, connected to an IV drip with some liquid. I tried to break the glass with the pistol grip, no result. Then I aimed the weapon at the electronic control panel and emptied the entire magazine into it. The lock clicked, the glass capsule door opened slightly. Disconnecting the IV, I lifted the girl in my arms. She was light, almost weightless, with pale skin and bluish lips. Her pulse was palpable, weak but stable. The timer showed less than 2 minutes when I began descending toward the eastern exit. The building was already burning in several places, beams cracking, threatening to collapse. On the second floor, I ran into Claire, who had returned to look for me. "Found her," I shouted over the crashing of the collapsing building. "She's alive but unconscious. Quickly to the exit." Claire nodded, but instead of running, pointed to another corridor. "Lauren went down to the basement. She's not alone. Frederick and several guards are there. They're trying to save something from the vault." I hesitated. The girl in my arms needed immediate medical attention, but if Lauren and Frederick escaped with the evidence, it was all for nothing. "Take her out," I decided, handing the girl to Claire. "I'll go down for Lauren and Frederick." "No," Claire's eyes flashed with determination. "We both go. This girl, she's my sister." I stared at her in bewilderment. "What?" "My younger sister, Anna. Frederick used her to blackmail me when I tried to escape the first time." Her voice trembled. "I thought she was long dead. Please, Mike, we have to get her out together." An internal conflict tore at me, the duty to save an innocent girl versus the need to catch the criminals. Claire resolved it. "There's little time. The main thing is to save innocent girls, and criminals won't get away. I have their names, photos, data. We can find them later." She was right, I nodded. "Okay, let's get out of here. The eastern exit should still be open." We moved down the corridor, carrying the girl between us. The building trembled with each step. Pieces of ceiling collapsed around us. Smoke grew thicker. We were less than 50 meters from the exit when Claire suddenly stopped. "Wait, I just remembered. There's another girl, the youngest from the new batch. Frederick kept her separately. She should be in a room at the end of this corridor." I looked at the timer, just over a minute. "No time, Claire, we won't make it." She handed me her sister. "Then you go, I have to try." Ignoring my warnings, she rushed back into the burning building. I cursed under my breath and, making sure the girl in my arms was breathing, carefully placed her near the very exit where rescuers would definitely find her. Or had Claire invented this last girl and run back not for her at all? Then I dashed after Claire, realizing that I had probably fallen in love with this recklessly brave woman. The last sonata. I caught up with Claire at the doors of the basement vault. The smoke was thinner here. The ventilation system was still working on the lower levels. The walls shook from explosions above, but the main structure still held. In the vault, we discovered an unexpected scene. Lauren, Frederick, and one of his bodyguards in a tense standoff. Lauren was trying to destroy hard drives with evidence, the very ones Frederick obviously wanted to preserve as his legacy. "You're an idiot, Lauren," Frederick hissed. "My collection is priceless. Even if the building collapses, digital records can be recovered. Art must live." "Your art is my prison," Lauren snapped, continuing to methodically destroy hard drives. "If these recordings fall into the authorities' hands, they'll hunt us for the rest of our lives." They were so engrossed in the conflict that they didn't immediately notice us. The bodyguard reacted first. Professional reflex made him turn and raise his weapon. I pushed Claire behind a column and simultaneously threw a knife from my wrist mount. The blade entered precisely into the bodyguard's shoulder, not fatal, but enough to make him drop the pistol. Frederick and Lauren turned at the noise. Their faces reflected different emotions. Frederick's, aristocratic disappointment, as if interrupted during an important lecture. Lauren's, cold fury. A tense four-way standoff began in the room, rapidly filling with smoke. Each pursued their own goals. I wanted to save Claire and capture evidence. Claire sought the missing girl. Lauren aimed to destroy evidence and escape. Frederick tried to preserve his perverted legacy. "Where is she?" Claire demanded, addressing Frederick. "The girl from the new batch. Where did you hide her?" "Ah, you mean Isabel," Frederick smiled with undisguised pleasure. "I'm afraid you're too late. She became part of my final masterpiece, a performance unfolding right now." "What do you mean?" Claire stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "This building is my greatest canvas," Frederick spread his arms wide, "and everything in it my paints. Isabel, like other exhibits, remains locked on the upper floors. Consider it my final chord. When the building collapses, they'll become part of the ruins, transformed into legend. They'll be talked about for decades." With a furious cry, Claire lunged at Frederick, but Lauren intercepted her, throwing her toward the shelves. In the heat of the struggle, they accidentally shattered a display case containing a collection of antique musical instruments, strings and parts scattered across the floor. I tried to intervene, but the bodyguard, despite his injury, entered the fight, blocking my path. He was an experienced fighter, but the wound and blood loss slowed his movements. After a short but intense battle, I managed to neutralize him using a chokehold. When I turned around, the situation had changed dramatically. Lauren had inflicted a serious wound on Claire, a long cut along her ribs. But Claire, despite the pain, maintained incredible focus. Her gaze fell on musical instruments scattered across the floor. Understanding flashed in her eyes. With agility that would make any special forces fighter envious, she grabbed strings from the broken instruments. What happened next resembled a macabre symphony of vengeance. Claire, a professional pianist with fingers trained by years of exhaustive practice, transformed musical strings into deadly weapons. She lightning-fast wrapped a cello's steel string around Frederick's neck. Her movements were precise, measured, as if she were performing a particularly complex musical piece. Frederick gasped, his elegance instantly evaporating, replaced by the panic of an animal sensing death. Lauren tried to intervene, but Claire, in an almost supernatural flash of fury and skill, used silver violin strings as whips, cutting through the air with frightening precision. One swing, and the string sliced Lauren's wrist, severing an artery. Lauren froze with an astonished expression, as if not believing she could be mortally wounded by a fragile pianist. "This is for all the girls you sold," Claire whispered, making another deadly swing. I stood motionless, unable to intervene, stunned by this transformation. Claire, a woman who created beauty through music, now delivered death with the same virtuosity with which she had once performed Chopin. Lauren, bleeding profusely, looked at me. There was no plea for help in her gaze, only cold understanding of irreversibility. "You always said I didn't understand art enough," I said, watching her agony. "Now you've become part of the exhibition yourself." The building shuddered from a particularly powerful explosion. Plaster showered from the ceiling, one of the supporting columns cracked. "We need to leave," I shouted, supporting the wounded Claire. "Everything's about to collapse." "Isabel," she exhaled, clinging to me with bloodied hands. "We must find her." "Frederick was lying," I said, quickly scanning the room. "Look." In the far corner of the vault, I noticed a small door disguised as part of the wall. Next to it on the floor lay a pass with a photograph of a young girl, apparently fallen from Frederick during the struggle. I kicked the door open with one blow. Inside was a tiny room with a single cot, on which lay a girl no older than 16. She was unconscious but breathing. "She's alive," Claire touched her face with trembling fingers. "God, she's alive." I lifted Isabel in my arms. "Now we leave. We have less than a minute." We moved toward the exit, making our way through dying galleries. Fire devoured paintings that concealed evidence of countless crimes. The path was difficult. Collapsed structures blocked corridors. Smoke hindered breathing and visibility. Claire, despite her injury, moved with the determination of someone for whom death was no longer frightening. She had passed through her own hell and emerged different, hardened, unstoppable. We escaped literally seconds before the main part of the roof collapsed, creating a fiery tomb for criminals forever buried under the rubble of their perverted temple of art. Escape from Inferno. Chaos reigned outside. Fire trucks, police, ambulances, crowds of onlookers held at a safe distance. Rescued girls sat in groups wrapped in blankets, giving statements to officers. Claire and I, carrying Isabel, headed to the nearest ambulance. Medics immediately took the girl, placed her on a stretcher, connected her to oxygen. "She needs immediate medical attention," I told the paramedic. "Possible overdose of sedatives, and my companion also needs help, serious side wound." While medics attended to Isabel, I helped Claire sit on the back seat of another ambulance. Her wound looked serious but not fatal, a deep cut along the ribs, fortunately not affecting vital organs. "We need to leave," she whispered, wincing from pain as the medic began treating the wound. "Police will ask too many questions." She was right. Despite the fact that we had saved the girls, our methods would hardly have been approved by law enforcement, especially considering my illegal entry and use of weapons. "First you need to be examined," I insisted. "Then we'll decide what to do next." At that moment, I noticed a familiar face among the police officers, Agent Harris, the one whose image I had seen in one of the paintings. He was carefully scanning the crowd, clearly looking for someone specific. I turned away, pulling my cap lower over my eyes. We were saved by the commotion, dozens of rescued victims, many wounded, general confusion. But this wouldn't last long. Soon systematic questioning would begin, identity checks. "I'll be back in a minute," I told Claire and the paramedic. "Need to check if anyone's still in the building." This was a lie, but it gave me an opportunity to quickly disappear into the crowd. I headed to the nearest parked vehicle, an inconspicuous sedan without emergency service markings. A quick inspection confirmed my suspicion. It was Harris's car, judging by the FBI badge on the dashboard. I used skills I had hoped never to apply again. 30 seconds, and the engine started without a key. Another minute, and I drove to the back of the ambulance where they were finishing bandaging Claire. "Get in," I called to the paramedic. "We need to get her to the hospital urgently. Equipment here is insufficient." The young medic hesitated for a moment. Then, seeing my confidence and the official appearance of the car, nodded and helped Claire climb into the back seat. "What about Isabel?" Claire asked when we drove away from the scene. "They'll help her," I assured her. "But now we need to disappear. Harris is here and he's looking for us." Claire shuddered. "You think he was part of all this?" "I'm sure. His face was on one of the paintings. He was watching the merchandise evaluation, most likely providing cover from the federal side." We drove onto the main highway, then turned onto secondary roads, winding through the suburbs to throw off possible pursuit. Claire leaned back in her seat, pale from blood loss but still conscious. "Where are we going?" she asked in a weak voice. "To a safe place," I replied. "I have a hideout prepared for extreme emergencies. There are medications, food, everything necessary." She smiled weakly. "You're always prepared for everything, aren't you?" "Professional habit," I shrugged. "You never know when your wife will turn out to be a human trafficker and you'll have to burn down a museum of contemporary art." We both laughed nervously. A terrible joke, but it relieved the tension. After an hour's drive on increasingly remote roads, we reached a small house on the outskirts of an abandoned dacha settlement. A place only I knew about, acquired through proxies in the first year after returning from service, when paranoia was my constant companion. I helped Claire enter the house and laid her on the couch. Her bandage was soaked with blood, but the bleeding had slowed. From the first aid kit, I took antibiotics, painkillers, sterile bandages. "Can you change the bandage yourself?" I asked. "Or shall I help?" "Help," she nodded. "My hands are shaking." I carefully removed the old bandage, treated the wound with antiseptic, and applied a fresh bandage. All this time Claire remained silent, only occasionally wincing from pain. "Thank you," she said when I finished, "for everything if it weren't for you." "If it weren't for you," I interrupted, "all those girls would have remained there. You risked your life going back into Frederick's den. That's the bravest act I've ever seen." She shook her head. "It's not bravery, it's necessity. I simply couldn't do otherwise." Our eyes met, and in that moment an understanding deeper than words arose between us. We had both gone through hell and returned, both lost part of ourselves in the process, and both, in some strange way, found each other. "What now?" Claire asked after a long silence. "Now," I pondered, "now we need to disappear, at least for a while. Harris and other corrupted officials will be looking for us, but we have evidence. I managed to grab one of the hard drives from the vault." I took from my pocket a small disk that I had seized at the last moment before our escape from the burning building. "With this, we can expose the entire network. Not immediately, of course. We need to act carefully, find journalists we can trust, create copies of the information, distribute them in secure locations." Claire nodded. "I have a contact, a journalist who investigates human trafficking. She's smart enough to take precautions before publishing." "Good," I said, "but first you need rest, recover your strength, and then we'll begin a new chapter." Claire smiled weakly and squeezed my hand. "A new chapter. I like how that sounds." Epilogue 1 year later. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the community center where I was finishing the restoration of an old fresco. The movements were still methodical, but a new gentleness had appeared in them that wasn't there before. Work on the fresco was part of a larger project to restore the building, which now served as a shelter and rehabilitation center for victims of human trafficking. Claire and I had founded it with money confiscated from the criminal organization, a fair redistribution of resources, as we called it. The past year had been eventful. Publication of evidence from the hard drive I had saved from the burning museum caused an international scandal. Dozens of high-ranking officials, businessmen, even several celebrities were implicated. Agent Harris tried to flee but was detained at the airport, one of the few who faced punishment. Many others used their connections and money to avoid justice. But the main thing wasn't this, but the saved lives. Over 100 girls were identified from documents from Studio Elysium. Many were returned home. Those who had nowhere to go found refuge in our center. I set aside the brush, hearing familiar sounds from the adjacent room. Claire was finishing a piano lesson. Schumann's melody, scenes from childhood, filled the building, displacing memories of other music that had sounded on that fateful night. I walked to the music class and stopped in the doorway, watching Claire work with a group of young women. Her fingers flew over the keys, demonstrating a passage, while the students watched attentively, trying to repeat. Among them was Isabelle, the same girl we had rescued at the last moment. Over the past year, she had blossomed, transforming from a frightened teenager into a confident young woman with obvious musical talent. Claire's sister Anna was also here, sitting by the window with a notebook, taking notes. She was studying psychology, planning to work with victims of violence in the future. Her recovery was slower. 2 years in captivity had left deep scars, but each day more life appeared in her eyes. When the lesson ended, Claire noticed me and smiled, openly, without a trace of the tension that had long remained after our escape from the burning building. "How's the restoration coming along?" she asked, approaching me. "Almost finished. A few more details and the fresco will be like new." "Restoring instead of destroying," she took my hand. "That's what we both needed." I nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of her words. We had both experienced traumas that changed us forever, but instead of allowing these wounds to define our lives, we used them as a foundation for something new. "Nervous about the concert?" I asked, noticing how she unconsciously flexed her fingers, a habit preserved from her previous life. "A little," Claire admitted. "It's my first public performance after everything, but I'm ready." That evening, about 200 people gathered in the small hall of the City Philharmonic, sympathizers to our cause, representatives of charitable organizations, several journalists. The concert was for charity, all proceeds directed to support the rehabilitation center. I sat in the front row with a sketchbook. When Claire came on stage in a simple black dress, the hall erupted in applause. Many knew her story, not all details, of course, but enough to understand the significance of the moment. She sat at the piano, froze for a moment with her hands on the keys, then began to play. Her new composition was called Liberation, a piece she had been writing throughout the past year. It began with anxious, dissonant notes, then passed through phases of struggle, pain, despair, and gradually transformed into a free, soaring melody. I drew while she played, trying to capture not only external resemblance but the essence of her music. On my canvas appeared not just a portrait, but a visual embodiment of sounds, lines flowing from dark and angular to smooth and light, symbolizing the path from pain to healing. When the last notes faded, absolute silence reigned in the hall. 1 second, 2, 3, and then the audience burst into thunderous applause. People rose from their seats, many not hiding their tears. Claire, bowing slightly, looked directly at me. In her gaze, I read everything I needed to know. We had gone through hell and returned. Not unscathed, but whole. Not the same as before, but authentic. At that moment, I realized that for the first time in many years, I felt at home. Not in terms of place, in terms of state of soul. As if a long, exhausting journey had finally come to an end. And something new had begun, not without its difficulties and challenges, but filled with meaning that we created together, painting by painting, note by note, day by day, transforming pain into beauty, darkness into light. Perhaps this was the real art that we were only now beginning to comprehend. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.